Hey guys, so today I thought I'd do a little short video on kind of navigating GitHub, and then I thought I'd do a second video about some more advanced GitHub techniques about how you can update. Maybe you're starting to wonder about getting into code, but for today I just thought I'd cover the basics about the layout of GitHub, how it works, and some of those kind of things. So a while ago, I had put out there and posted a sort of guide, which basically this video is the same thing, about how GitHub works and what it is, but it's a real overview. And so I'll just bring that PDF up for memory. But basically, think about GitHub as a public library where you can, authors have books that they publish. And in this case, it's code developers that publish their code for certain projects. And they put it up on the bookshelves, and you can take a copy of the book. You can make a copy of the book, you can bring it to your house, you can read through the book, you can edit it, you can make notes on it, you can mark it up, you can use the book. Maybe it's a cookbook for how to make lentil soup, and you say, I need more basil, and you write a note on the side and you say, add more basil. So basically, the code goes up as a book in the library, and you can take the code out. Now, the confusing part is you start worrying about, well, if I write on my copy of the book at home, is it going to mess up the copy of the library and those kinds of things? That's what most people work through in their worries. But just sort of keep the concept of a public lending library in your head, that the code writers are putting their recipes, their cookbooks, their books up online, and you can borrow those books and you can do whatever you want with them. You can write changes to the recipes, you can change how things are going, and if you want to, you can go back and tell the authors of that recipe, I think you need more basil. And you can tell them, this is how much basil and this is how you should do it. And you do that via pull requests from your version of the cookbook. You tell them, I added basil to this recipe, and you put a pull request back to them to say, I think you should change your recipe to add more basil. And the author, the code developer, can look at that and decide whether or not to accept it or reject it. There's also the ability of the code writer to tell you, hey guys, I thought it needed more rosemary, and I added rosemary to the recipe, and I've updated the recipe, and you can decide whether or not you want to go pull a new copy of his recipe. So that's the basic idea. It's a really weird analogy, I know, but I'm trying to convert geek speak into regular English, or analogies that might make a little bit of sense, that aren't all about code and repos and branches and all of that. Eventually we'll get to those words, but just sort of the analogy of a lending library of books of code that the authors or the code writers have set out there for collaboration. And that is the purpose of GitHub. It's to share projects so that multiple people can start with the same basic recipe and add or contribute changes to that recipe to try and get the best possible lentil soup at the end of the day. So with that said, that's sort of the idea that's posted on this PDF and I'll post a link to it again. So let's look at some of our cookbooks that we have available in the looping community. So I'm going to go down here and bring up a document I sort of put up here. I'm going to take this. So if we're going with the analogy of authors and cookbooks and bookshelves, books and all of that, so these three, OpenAPS, LoopKit, and NightScout, we could view those as three different authors that have projects going, cookbooks going. So OpenAPS has a set of cookbooks, and there's one called ORF0, there's one called Docs, there's one called OpenAPS. LoopKit, a different cook, if you will, has published a few books. One is called Loop, one is called Loop Kit, one is Loop Docs. Night Scout is another cook, and they have lots of different books they publish, but one of them that we're particularly interested in is CGM Remote Monitor, which makes your Night Scout site. So as we look at this idea, basically in our looping lending library, the ones we tend to go to the most are probably from these three authors. And in particular, we're looking at these particular cookbooks that they've put out. And so if we go on GitHub, we can go to those authors. For example, I'm logged into my account, and we can go in. If you do, I'm going to go up to the URL, and you can see it up here. It says, if you append the end of the github.com with a / and then the author's name, the cookbook author, these names, you can find out what their account, what their shelf at the library contains. So the shelf on their library is here. It's at github.com / and then the author's name. And you can find all of these different repositories, which are basically their cookbooks. And so, like I said, OpenAPS has Docs, or F0. They have other books, but we tend to not use them as much in the looping community. If you're just the average user, you probably won't go into these cookbooks very often. The ones you'll mostly go into are these three, or F0, Docs, or OpenAPS. If you're a Loop user, let's go check out LoopKit's books. Loop has Loop, Xstrip G5, LoopKit, Loop Docs, Assets, so it has 5 cookbooks. Most of the ones we deal with are these 3 here, and most of you only deal with one, and that's the Loop book. Night Scout has, again, similar. Night Scout has lots of different books on its bookshelf. You can check them out. They have 23 books on the bookshelf at Night Scout, but only one that we tend to look at is CGM Remote Monitor, which is the book that builds your Heroku site for you. So if you click on that, for example, you get this really common one where we're all usually familiar with the Deploy to Heroku button, but all the code for your Night Scout site is held in this cookbook called CGM Remote Monitor. So I hope that gives a good overview of kind of how this is structured. There's authors or groups, project, and they might be interested in vegan cooking, and so they'll put out a bunch of cookbooks that all relate to vegan cooking, or maybe they're dairy-free, and so they put out a bunch of dairy-free. So for us in particular, LoopKit bookshelf contains books related to looping. OpenAPS contains books related to that. So to further take the analogy, each of these cookbooks has a couple different versions available. It has a version, which I'm going to call, let's indent again, but it has a version called Master. Most of the cookbooks have a version called Master. And the Master cookbook is something that you're not going to mess up. The tastes are going to be good, it's tried, it's true, the temperatures are right, everybody's made it a whole bunch. It generally is really stable, and these are nice, good cookbooks. Everything works. But let's say some of these recipes are being tweaked. Maybe there's a new one they're trying out. Maybe there's a little hidden ingredient that they're just trying out. They're not sure if it'll work out right. They don't want to put that cookbook out with things that are still being tried and tested. So they'll have a second version of the cookbook, same recipe, but it might have a little tweaks in it that they're still working out. That addition of rosemary or that addition to thyme. And until they come to consensus that that is really better for the recipe, they won't publish it in the Master cookbook. They're going to publish it in the book that has the chicken scratch writing on the side. It has pencil marks. It's still in development. So they have a dev branch. And basically that tells users, you can decide, do you want the tried and true recipe that we're all sure works? Or do you want to try the one that might still have some tweaks that need to be made? We're trying them out. So almost every single one of these has a master and a dev branch. Loop does, for example. We talk about that all the time. Loop has a master and Loop has a dev. At any given time, all of these, this one has a master and a dev as well. So I'm going to just kind of say, for example, they have this. So which one you choose to build or use or look at will depend on your level of comfort with how you want your recipe. Do you want one that might have some glitches and might sort of be in development? Or do you want the really stable version? Most general users will want the very stable version, and they're going to deal with what's called the master copy of that cookbook. So that's the layout, just giving you a little heads up, because as we go into GitHub, I just want you to sort of keep that in mind. So this is what you would call the user or the account. This is the overall bookshelf. The books right here, those are called repositories. So the repositories are the books on the bookshelf, and these ones are called branches. Master and dev. So if we look at that PDF that I had opened just a little bit ago, let's bring that back up. You can see the analogy here is that you could have authors. Each author has its own bookshelf, and within the bookshelf is a repository, and the repository has different versions of each book. So I think that sort of helps a little bit with the analogy. Different copies of each book are the branches. So let's go in and take a look at some of these. I'm going to start with LoopKit as an example. So we'll go into LoopKit, we'll check it out. Let's check out the Loop repository, because this is one a lot of people are familiar with. Is generally speaking, you can get your layout here, and I want you to notice a couple things are important. One, this is where you are. I am in LoopKit's Loop version. I am not in my version of Loop, I'm in Loop's version of Loop. So this is how Loop looks. Here's the branches. I can switch between the branches simply by using this drop down. And you'll notice there's actually a couple more branches here than we talked about. I talked about master and dev. There's a couple others. What are those other versions? You can see all the branches available by clicking on the branches. Anywhere you are, you can see the branches and you say, oh, okay, what are these? Well, these are other versions of the cookbook that might be really specific. So if Pete or someone else or a dev of some sort is working on one particular issue, one particular recipe that is really specific, and they don't want it necessarily merged in really widely, they'll make another subset to work on that in particular for a little bit. So these are usually more shorter term branches that are specific to one particular issue that'll hang out for a little bit, and then they'll get merged and then eventually deleted. He'll probably delete this one after a while. So you can always see the branches. Another really useful thing on the layout for these user accounts is the commits page. And this is a detailed history of every change to the recipes that have ever been made. You can go here and look exactly what's been done to the recipes to tweak them and make them better. So in this particular case, the changes will depend on which book you're holding. Sometimes you'll be holding the master branch book and you'll be able to see all the changes here. Generally, the dev branch will have a much more detailed chicken scratch history about how they tweaked the recipes, because it's very detailed. This is where the first initial tweaks go, so you'll be able to see them. You can see dev branch For example, had a change on February 5th where somebody merged in an implement glucose schedule override in Watch app. So this was actually, some of you may have seen, that the Watch app now includes the pre-meal and workout target buttons on the watch itself. This is the code that actually changed how that works. So you can click on that commit and you can see exactly which files were changed and how each different file, there were several files changed. You can see exactly how they were changed. If it's red, it means that was deleted. If it was green, that means the code was added to the page. And you can go through and check all of that. In this particular case, he just deleted a space. And so that goes away. It's shown in the highlighted darker red. This was deleted. This was added. The darker green, darker red is about addition or subtraction in terms of like a single line. So I think that gives you an idea. We'll go back up to the top. It shows you basically all of the files that were changed and everything that was done. It's pretty useful. For example, if you wanted to see, this was when we did Russian language conversion. These are all the changes that were done to translate into Russian. No, I don't speak Russian. That was pretty fun. You can scroll back down. This was when active IOB was added in the Today widget. You can check on that and see all the different files that were changed and how they were changed. So, just so you know, if you're looking to learn more about code, browsing through the commit history is a really useful way of doing that. Then the other important part that I want you to see, you can click on these tabs here. The Issues tab is very cool. If you go to the Issues tab, you'll be able to see all of the different things other cookbook users have reported as, I think your recipe has a problem, or I'm not sure how to interpret one large egg. Do you mean a white egg, a green egg, a brown egg, and how big? People can ask all their various questions and report issues in the Issues tab. So if you're finding a problem, if you have a question, go to the Issues, see if somebody else has already logged it. You can add to one if it's already logged, or you can start a new one if you didn't see it there. So that is a really useful tab. The other useful tab on all of these are pull requests. So pull requests are where people who checked out the book, used the recipes, and said, I think I can improve this recipe. They go back to the author and through pull requests and tell them, I'd like to improve the book. And you tell them which book you want to improve. So usually when you're telling them you want to improve something, you're going to send it to the dev branch because that's where you try new things out. And the original author is going to look at what your recipe changes are and decide whether or not to incorporate those. So, for example, yesterday I submitted 2 pull requests to loop code, one of which you can see here. If you click on it, it says, okay, I'd like to use loop settings to update the Night Scout profile. So in this case, somebody had some good code that I found, and I cherry-picked that out and did a PR with it, a pull request. And I'm saying, basically, 3 files are going to be changed by this, and so the author, in this case, the original dev, is going to be Pete or whoever is working on loop at the time, is going to go and look at this and say, oh, these are the files you want to change. And he's going to look at it, be able to see, this is what I'm adding, this is how the code will go, this will how it works. And then if he has a problem with any of the way that it's being done, he'll write an answer back and tell me, I don't like how this is implemented. I think your recipe still needs a little bit of tweaking. How about you change it this way or consider changing something, and he'll give me feedback on it. Or if everything looks okay, he'll say, yep, I'm going to incorporate this to dev. So basically, that's pull requests. It's the person who borrowed the code or the recipe, the book, is sending a message back to the original author that you'd like to make changes. So the interesting thing, though, is that changes in the author's original books won't always flow to you unless you go and look for it. In other words, once you leave the library, you won't know that things changed back on the original copies unless you go and specifically query. And where this comes in a lot is for Night Scout users in particular, is the people who are using CGM Remote Monitor won't know that there's an update. So most of the time, it's Night Scout CGM Remote Monitor. When you want to update your Night Scout site, you basically have to go back to the library, look at the book, and intentionally update your copy of the book to incorporate whatever recipe changes they made back at the library. So to do that, you will go to your copy of the book. For example, let's go to your profile, and you go to your copy of the book. So I'm going to look at my repositories, and this is my repository. This is my copy that I checked out from the library of Night Scout's CGM Remote Monitor repository. And I can tell this is my forked copy. It has a little forked version. It has my name here, and it says forked from. I go, okay, this is interesting. Let's see how this works. And it says right here, my branch is even with Night Scout Master. It says I'm the same. But if I go to the dev branch, let's see if they had any here. Oh, nope. An hour ago I was testing out this video, and therefore it's even. I could go to, for example, let's try a different one. Maybe my open APS could be out of date. Yep, it says here, my branch is 3 commits behind open APS master. So I can say, you know what? I want to pull those in. I want to get my copy up to date with what the authors were doing. I can look at the commits. I can see what 3 commits I'm missing. And I could look at what exactly was added. So, ooh, add a new radio locale parameter for Medtronics. Maybe I want that. I can look at the code. I can decide, yep, that's something I want. And I can go back and I can say, okay, let's compare. And the reason GitHub is set up is for a collaborative workspace. So it generally has a base assumption that you're contributing to a project. So your copy is going to be contributing to the original copies back at the library. In this particular case, we're going the opposite direction. The authors have updated recipes. I want to pull them to mine. And so we need this to move in the opposite direction. You can see this little arrow says which direction the information is flowing. I'm not providing them new information. I want them to provide me new information. So you can do that by changing the base forks here. It gets a little confusing if you start messing with these. I find the easiest way is to just go up to the URL and switch right here. You can go and switch your name and the name of the author, which is right behind github.com. You can switch these two, and that will give you the right direction of the comparison. So if I switch those two and press return, it switches how the comparison is made. Now it's saying, okay, the library copy is going to flow into your home copy. So the copy you have in the library is going to go to yours. I'm going to create the pull request. I'm going to say I'm updating my master branch. I'm going to create the pull request. And it says, okay, you want to commit 3 different changes to your home copy from the copy in the library. And I'll say, yep, let's merge it. I'll confirm the merge. And now it's merged, and I've just updated my home copy of that book. In particular, though, you have to update each branch separately. You don't update the whole repo at once. Each book is its own comparison. So if you want to do a dev branch, I can see I'm also 5 commits behind the dev branch. You can do the same thing. You can go here and you can compare. And again, I just switch these around. And now I put my name at the front. And I can see, okay, I want the library's copy to update my home copy. I'm going to say dev update. I'm updating my dev branch of the cookbook. Says I want to update it. Yep, that's the right direction. Confirm the merge. And now I have the purple merge button. I can tell, I can go back to the code and I can see my dev branch is also now up to date. The one commit that I'm ahead is that I updated it. So that's great. That means I have all the latest and greatest from the library, as well as whatever I might have added to my own home copies. So that's the basics of GitHub, repos, branches, all of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to do an oversight of sort of where you find commits and branches. If you can also look at the releases, this has to do with the stable versions that they release. So when they have an update to the master that they say, okay, all the bugs and glitches are worked out. This is a really sweet set of recipes. We like them a lot. This is really stable. They'll push out a release, and that tells people, okay, we got a brand new big one, and you'll know about it. You can watch repositories if you want to see them. The way that if there's ever something you're interested in seeing more of or watching more, you can go to, let's say, for example, you want to watch this repository and play with it. You can click on that repository and you click the fork button. The fork button, as it says on there, is it says you're going to bring over or fork your own copy to your account. So basically, it's going to the librarian and saying, I want a copy of that book over in my home library. So make a copy, bring it over. So that's what forking does, is it takes a copy, puts it into your account. And so when you go to your profile, you can see all the repositories that you have forked over or created yourself or otherwise contribute to. So CGM Remote Monitor is super popular. There's 14,000 people that have checked out copies of CGM Remote Monitor into their home accounts. Looped, there's 270 people that have forked it over. You don't always have to fork in order to use the code. You can also download it, and we'll get into that kind of thing about the different ways you can use the codes and repositories in the next video, but I just wanted to sort of give the overview of what repositories are, where these things are, and sort of how things work. So hopefully this has been helpful. Just so you know, you can't mess up the author's copies of the books unless they've included you as an author. So I'll just say that as you go through GitHub and you sort of play around and mess around with stuff, you actually can't break anything important unless the authors have specifically given you rights to do that. And most of us are locked out of these main kits, this OpenAPS, LoopKit, and NightScout. We aren't going to be able to break it. So no matter what you do, you're not going to break the original copy. You may mess up your own copy temporarily, but that could be undone. You can always throw away your old home library and rebuild it by getting new forks of things. If you want to do that, let's say you freak out and you say, wow, I totally messed this one up. You can go to your settings. You can go way down at the bottom and you say, delete this repository. You can wipe it out and you can refork fresh. So you can go back to the original, you can fork it fresh. So I'm just trying to give sort of some ideas about lessening your fears in playing with GitHub. Nothing's unrecoverable. The only people who have permissions to do damage are the people who should know how to undo their damage. So you should be okay. Anyway, that's GitHub in a nutshell. And we'll move on to video 2, which will be how to do GitHub incorporated with changes and how you get to and from your local computer with GitHub. All right, see ya.